Today's conversation is one of the most raw and important we've had on the show. I'm Steve Saporn, and welcome to the Neuro's Journey podcast. Dr. Ryan Phillips is a physician who specializes in men's mental health, trauma, and nervous system healing. But before he became a healer, he was shaped by profound loss. His father was a Midwestern popcorn farmer who went bankrupt and took his own life to provide insurance money for his family. But he also became a mass shooter. And that wound would send Dr. Phillips on a journey of service, from the Himalayas doing community health work to pioneering integrative approaches that combine psychedelic therapy, neurofeedback, breath work, and the healing power of nature. Now, as a father himself, he takes his kids on adventures through those same Himalayan mountains, breaking cycles and redefining what healthy masculinity looks like. We talk about why the mental health system wasn't built for men, and why men who feel successful on paper are often still frayed inside. We explore what it takes to move on from achievement to actual wholeness, and how high performers can build a 90-day plan that changes things for them. I started the Neuro's journey because I understand what it feels like to feel broken and lost, and I know there's a way out. It starts with conversations like this one. All right, well, I feel really honored and happy to welcome Dr. Ryan Phillips from the Neurogrove Clinic in Arvada. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're a doctor with a full business and a busy life and 4 kids and all that. Yep. So that you would take the time to do this to help people heal and thrive means a lot to me, and I'm sure other people. And I just also want to say, you know, my family has really benefited personally from working at your clinic. 3 of us have done neurofeedback and psychedelic integration, and you know, since kind of we got into the fold of working there, all of our lives have improved dramatically. So
that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So
thank you so much. And so, you know, I'll start off on something that we spoke about when we were prepping for this call, and sort of feeling like the mental health care system is more of a feminine thing, and then that can also kind of potentially discourage men from entering as patients and getting the outcomes that we want. So what's your take on that, and how do we create an experience for men where they can thrive, you know, in that system?
Yeah, and I think, you know, this can be a difficult conversation to have because whenever we use terms like feminine and masculine, people have a lot of associations and a lot of cultural narratives tied up in those words. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I think we use the words feminine and masculine having this discussion, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as male and female biological sex, but I'll say a difference in approach to things. Now, a lot of times that more feminine approach or more feminine energy does align with more biologically female individuals, right? And the mental health field is dominated mostly by female identifying people. Mm-hmm. So I think the last time I looked at the statistic, about 3/4, about 75% of counselors are female. And it's much less common to be a male working in the mental health space in this culture and in this country. And because of that, there has been, I'll say, a shift in the balance in the approaches to mental health, especially counseling approaches to mental health that tend to be more feminine in nature and sometimes leave men feeling a little bit uncomfortable or out of sync with the care that they're receiving. And 2/3 of the patients that come into mental health clinics tend to be people who are female. And the old narrative was always like, well, women experience mental health challenges more than men. And it's like, no, I think that this is underreporting and underdiagnosis. Like, men oftentimes don't come forward at the same rate that women do because of the stigma associated traditionally with mental health challenges in men.
So interesting, because as far as that feminine masculine dynamic, I'll tell you something for me that I've as a man, pretty masculine, I like to kind of see, okay, this is what's happening. This is like the road that I'm going to take. This is what might be my benefits and goal. It's kind of like, let me see the goal and let me move towards it. And okay, I have to overcome this obstacle and that obstacle. And, I've frankly been a little shocked that like most mental health providers don't do any of that.
Right.
They come in and they just sort of, talk with you about their specialty or hear what's going on. And personally, I felt sort of just in the wilderness a little bit about that. And so when you're meeting with someone, do you employ any of those kinds of things so they feel more comfortable in the way they operate in the world?
Yeah. I mean, I would say one of the most common complaints that I hear from men about trying to get mental health care is, I don't want to just sit around and talk about my problems all day. I want somebody to tell me what to do. I want to find solutions. I want to be able to move forward. Like, I want to solve this thing, right? So more masculine approach tends to be more solutions and skills oriented, where a lot of times a more feminine approach is more about being seen, being heard, being valued. And I think regardless of biological sex, I think everybody needs a combination of those two. But men tend to really want to hear about those practical things that they can do and the skills they can develop to actually create a solution to their problems. It's not enough for most men to just come and be heard and be seen. And so I think taking a more solutions-oriented and skills-based approach is more appealing and a lot more comfortable for most men.
Yeah, what occurs to me in that is I think we do want to be heard and all that, but in the framework of how we understand the world, right? So yes, as part of it, I think it's really important to be heard. And I think a lot of men don't feel heard about these kinds of things. But in the context of this is how I achieve things in the world. And so I'm working towards this. And part of it is being open and vulnerable and talking about your things. But other parts of it are working towards that goal. And even just to kind of know what could change? I mean, I will tell you since I have had some healing. Every part of my life is so improved and different. From my relationships to the people that I attract to the business that I do. I mean, every opportunity has become better in this. And to really say that, especially to men, there's a lot of men with a lot of trauma who've been very successful in the world and feel this sort of emptiness, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of men who their trauma actually fuels their pursuit of success, right? And they want to use success and they want to use achievement to fill the void that has been created by trauma in their life. And you can only do that for so long, right? So that's a pattern I've seen quite a bit. I don't know if you connect with that at all or...
Oh yeah, I connect with it a lot. I mean, my experience of gone through that myself. I mean, I didn't know what trauma was. I didn't know I had trauma, but I just oriented around the money, the house, the success, the wife, the whole thing. And, I was fortunate to be successful in business relatively young. So I achieved all the goals that I had for myself in my early 20s by my early 30s. Wish I'd have set higher goals, honestly. But when that happens, to me, it was actually you would think the achievement of your goals would set you up in a way where you feel really good about yourself. But it put me into more of a kind of depression and more addiction and whatnot because it was oh, this doesn't do it either.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a trap that a lot of men in this culture fall into is finding their self-worth and their identity and their value all in extrinsic goals. If I achieve this, if I get these letters before my name, after my name, if I earn this much money, if I climb the ranks, if I build this or whatever, then I'll finally feel good about myself. We have a whole society that has trained us since we were really young to find our value, our identity, our self-worth in those extrinsic goals. But there's this lack of intrinsic self-worth that most men have in this society. And as long as that black hole of a lack of self-worth is there, you can pour infinite amounts of extrinsic achievement into that and it will just infinitely gobble that up. And I think that's one thing that men have to learn from a more feminine approach, is learning to cultivate that more, that capacity for intrinsic motivation, but then also like self-worth, self-love, self-care.
Yeah.
Right. That's hard territory for a lot of guys in this culture.
Well, and especially, I think maybe the greatest medicine would be connection.
Yes.
And you have the largest companies in the world with thousands, hundreds of thousands of PhDs trying to drive men into their basements alone, especially young men. I think I read a stat that men now, the average 40-year-old men, have 50% less friends than they had 20 years ago.
We're going to, I think, talk about this a little bit later in some of the things we're going to cover, but this is like a really big passion area of mine is connection. We have a society that has taught us as men from a very young age that we are to be a self-made man. And our greatest values are independence, autonomy, self-reliance, which are really valuable and powerful qualities to have, but not as standalones. And after my time living in India for over a decade, when I came back to this country, I really realized how isolated everybody is, but especially men and especially middle-aged men. And this isolation piece, I think, is so crucial in understanding why so many men are struggling so much.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that sets us up well. Let's talk about your experience in the Himalayas and how that really informed like what you're doing now in your clinic and how you view life.
Yeah, boy, that was just a critical experience for me on so many levels. And I guess long story short, with my background was 3 days after graduating from college with a degree in global studies and international development, my wife and I, we moved into pretty much the most remote village we could find in the Indian Himalayas. And we left and went straight there, moved in first with the local family, and eventually I built a small cabin. We lived dirt floor cabin, cooking on a fire, no indoor plumbing, no bathrooms, doing community development work and later public health work in really remote Himalayan villages. And the thing that, well, there were several things that happened. I mean, I could probably go on for days telling you stories from that phase of my life. But one of the first things that happened for me personally was after we had been there, maybe I'm going to guess about 3 months, I woke up one morning and I thought, I have never actually been healthy before. I thought I knew what healthy felt like, but I didn't. This is what healthy feels like. And then I started asking myself, well, why? Because I was living, a very uncomfortable lifestyle. No indoor plumbing, no indoor heating, dirt floor, like walking everywhere, no vehicle roads, no electricity.
The picture of health.
You would think, this is a very challenging, would be a very demanding environment. It's like, why do I feel so much better? And I'm kind of by nature a root cause thinker. So I started thinking, well, maybe it's because I go to sleep at sundown and wake up at sunrise. Maybe it's because I only eat seasonal local produce and my diet's a lot simpler. Maybe it's because I walk everywhere I need to go and I never ride in a vehicle. Maybe it's because my only form of entertainment is human connection and I'm not, watching stuff on screens. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's the other. And after kind of an embarrassing long time of stewing on this, just one day I'm like, no, dummy, it's not any of those things. It's all of those things. It's a whole system. And living in nature and living in this more natural way, this is the effect it has on you. And I mean, I had never felt so much balance, so much peace, so much energy, so much motivation. Another thing I considered was I really valued the work I was doing and I really believed in it. So there was a sense of meaning and purpose and connection with the people I was working with the work I was doing. And it was all of those things. Like health is a system, not a state to be achieved. And that was the first time, I really did think I was a healthy person. And by some definitions I was, I would be what I called Midwest healthy. I grew up in Indiana and, I chose the whole wheat bread over the Wonder Bread. And I didn't eat, drink a lot of soda, eat a lot of junk food. I was physically active and, I ate my vegetables. Midwest healthy.
Right.
And, I'd never really been sick, didn't have any health problems. And I could not believe how much better I felt and how much more passionate about my life and just existence than I felt than I'd ever felt before. So on a personal level, that happened. But then along with that, coming from this society of being independent, autonomous, self-made men, the way I was working with the community began to really reprogram all of my beliefs about myself, about the world, about human relationships and interaction. Everything was community-based. And the way that people supported each other and interacted with each other, the way that people showed up to get involved in the projects I started to serve and take care of their community, the way people took care of me when I was in need, and the way that people just connected, not because there was any agenda, but how much people just enjoyed and really valued being with other human beings. It began to just unknit my whole philosophy and way of being and taught me a new way to be. And then having, been immersed in that for over a decade, whenever I'd come back to the States and I'd get back into the culture here, it was beyond reverse culture shock. It was like, it was kind of overwhelming. This seemed like a desperately lonely place to me. And whenever we moved back here to live again, I could just, all around me, it felt like there was invisible walls between people. Like there's someone right there and I want to connect with them. And you go to connect with them and then you feel that, that hesitation.
Right.
I moved in, I used to have a house right up here in Lafayette.
Oh, cool.
And so when we moved back, we were in Lafayette, and one of those cookie cutter communities where the houses are all 5 feet apart. And I went around and started getting to know all my neighbors and inviting people over and stuff. And I heard it time and time again from everybody, we've lived here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and we've never known any of our neighbors. It wasn't until you came here that we all started to get to know each other. There's this systemic isolation and loneliness that so many people here, and I think that's one of the primary reasons that 1 in 4 U.S. adults and 1 in 3 U.S. teens has a diagnosable mental health condition. I think it's a huge central factor.
It's an interesting take because I think that's more of a U.S. thing than, say, a Western lifestyle thing. I'm a child of all 4 of my grandparents were born in Greece. When you go to Europe and you see the way they bring, they're having dinner. Yeah. Every member from the oldest to the youngest is at that thing. They really value the connection. My son and I were in Portugal for a couple months the last year. He did online school. And it was really just noticeable how much they valued just every little part of the city had a park. And it was filled with people every night, maybe having a glass of wine or something. But it just felt like this is the way that people are living. And, and the U.S. is kind of a unique spot, right? It's like an immigrant country of people that decided to leave their country, mostly, the vast majority of the population to come here and kind of be entrepreneurial. And I don't know what's happened, but I do sense after being there for 2 months last year, I sense that there's something about our culture that's just not right. It's sickening us in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of money, though.
Yeah. Well, some people have money. Some people do. But you've hit on a couple points that are like elements of kind of a personal theory that I have. And that is, history created a really unique natural experiment with America. The people who are attracted here, obviously this is not including indigenous populations, but the settlers that came to America, the people who migrated here during that season, we were the people who said, you know what, I'm better off on my own. I don't need the old world. I don't need the community. I don't need the family. I don't need the old way of doing things. All I need is my own grit, some tools, a few resources, and land, and I will be better off than in community.
And some guns.
And some, one of those tools I mentioned was definitely guns. So I think, like, if we want to think about this in a more like biological level, history selected for a certain genotype and phenotype of personality that was attracted to that way of being. And so it was like history collected all of a certain phenotype, genotype of people and funneled them into one culture. And like we are by nature, like these fierce individualists. And that's not just culture and psychology. Like there's also genes associated with that as well. And we are a very, very unusual group of people. Like you said, it's not just being Western. Being American is a very particular thing. It's a very particular thing. And until you've had the time to live in another culture or to travel significantly, you don't really realize what an unusual group of people and unusual culture we are. We really do stand out in the world. There are some things that make us different. So America is an interesting place.
Yeah, it's interesting because you were talking about like health as a system rather than a state. And, I know for me, because I had a very heavy trauma background, so like what I thought I was going for was a state, right? Like something will finally just relieve this feeling. And eventually, actually, that happened. Like I don't have this internal somatic kind of oncoming nightmare on a daily basis. But it wasn't like what I really learned. I use a little different wording. It's a process for me. Like I've learned a way to live to feel better. Yeah. And I know that if I do things on a daily basis and encourage that, and so I wonder, we were talking about the U.S. So when you're trying to communicate that to people, right, you're battling a lot of things, right? You're battling all of the corporations that are basically trying to poison us, plus our sort of, the makeup that we were just talking about. So how do you, to get real action from people and real change, how do you work with them to kind of convince them that this is a way to go?
Yeah, I wish there was one standard answer to that. And it really
would be easier for you.
Yes, it would be. And, people are entering into that discussion from very, very different points. Even within this American culture, there's a lot of different subcultures, and there's the subcultures of families and individual differences. So where people are ready to engage in that discussion is different, and you have to kind of meet people where they're at. One story that I tell people a lot, and I think I may have shared this with you already, so forgive me if I did, but I was training for a bike ride with my oldest son, and we had just moved back to America, and we were actually here in Boulder. And we had been out for a ride, and we stopped downtown Boulder, and we were walking along the street, and there was this statue there. And so my oldest son was about 8 years old at the time. And we walked up to the statue, and there's this Greco-Roman looking, guy with pecs and abs and flowing hair. He kind of looked like Fabio. Remember Fabio back in the day? And flowing hair and rippling muscles. And he has a chisel and a hammer. And the chisel is right here, and the hammer is here. And it looks like he's carving himself. And then from about the waist down, it turns into this rugged pillar of stone. And at the bottom of that pillar of stone, there's a plaque, and it says, "The Self-Made Man." So I pointed at the statue, and I asked my son, again, he's 8, "What do you think of that statue?" And he's like, "I don't know. I kind of like some parts of it, and some parts of it are kind of weird." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I'm like, "I see one big problem with this statue. I see a logical fallacy at work here, and I want you to tell me if you can figure it out." And like only a kid can do, he looks at it for a second and says, "No, Dad, there's 2 things wrong with it." I'm like, oh, here we go. My oldest son is like a real old soul. He's always been like wise beyond his years. And I'm like, "All right, hit me with it. Tell me what the 2 problems are." And he says, "Who carved out his arms so that they could move so he could carve himself? And where did he get the hammer and chisel from?" Wow. And like, just take a second to like think about that response from him. And it's like, exactly. Like we have this idea of this thing that we are supposed to make ourselves into as men, and all the impetus is on us to do it. So then if we fail, whose fault is it? Our fault, right? But what we don't see is that we are connected to other human beings, to societies, to economy, to the environment, to factors so far beyond our control that we don't even know about. Like, what about the 18 years of people investing in us to carve out our arms so that we can even make ourselves into self-made men? Mm-hmm. From the conditions that your mother was in during the pregnancy, her nourishment, the amount of stress she was under, the genes that were passed on from our ancestors. There are so many things that help determine who we are that are outside of our control. And that we don't tend to focus on those things because it doesn't square with this self-made man narrative. So those things fall off the radar, mm-hmm. right? So in some ways, like when we engage in this conversation, whether it be doing like ordering a gene report and being like, oh, no wonder you're having this challenge or you're having this reaction to this medication. These are your genes and this has been with you since birth, to having discussions about childhood trauma, to the cultures we grew up in and how they affected us. Like, not everybody's to the point where they're ready to dismantle this whole self-made man narrative. And there's strengths to that narrative too. Yeah. But sometimes whenever we begin to slowly, gently put this light on all of these factors that influence how we are, then it begins to dawn on people, oh, my health and who I am doesn't end at the border of my skin here. Mm. And actually, how could I have ever been convinced that that was the case? You know? So I would say that's some of the starting points.
You know, it's interesting. This is an odd little image that came into my mind about the self-made man and what your son was talking about. And I was thinking about, you know, when you see cheerleader pyramids, and then somebody climbs all these people and they're at the top, right? So that person is self-made in some way. They climbed
in their own role.
But they are standing on all of the other people that serve them and gave a springboard. And there's a real way to think of like a unity of those two concepts.
Yeah, and we are in such a polarized place in society right now that we tend to think in extremes and either or, but it's both and you kind of just nailed it with your metaphor, which is we all do have an individual responsibility to do the best we can with what we have and to take responsibility for ourselves, right? And to use our independence and autonomy and self-determination to the extent that we are able. But we also have to recognize too that like we can only do so much on our own, and there are so many things outside of our control. And you know, that's what I really saw. Even though I lived in India, I was with Nepali people in the region that I lived in. And I have never met such hardworking, industrious, self-determined people in my life. Mm. The capacity that my friends and my neighbors had, how strong and resilient, and in a lot of ways, you know, self-made. There was nobody there to build your house or your cowshed for you. You did everything. Mm-hmm. But everybody there was deeply aware that without the support and connection with the broader community, that they would never survive and they would never thrive. Mm. And it was like exactly what you said, like, and I think this is what we're kind of missing in this culture is like, yes, we need to be, you know, self-determined, autonomous individuals. But that doesn't put us at odds with also being members of a community, a society, in an environment that we can both nourish and we can also receive nourishment from. It's both and, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know, that's really amazing because, you know, as someone with had a lot of childhood trauma and you know, mostly from men, you know, I developed that self-reliant kind of vibe. And as I've, you know, kind of matured in my path, one, I get really emotional when especially men like offer help to me. Mm. You know, even just you saying yes to this interview, like, you know, I get emotions from. But it's also, as I've evolved, and I think this loneliness of men, it also tells you, like, when you are willing to accept help, it tells you that other people are willing to give it and that you are valued. Mm-hmm. And not just for your achievements or when you're perfect,
but
Yeah.
you're actually valued for when you need to be picked up.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something really important for our, people to realize and to really experience.
Yeah. And like that reciprocity and that mutual benefit piece is super important. Like I grew up in a very conservative evangelical Christian environment, and my early thinking in my life was really shaped by that. And it's so funny because like, what is the golden rule? Do unto your neighbor as you would have done unto yourself, or love your neighbor as you love yourself. But I feel like the only thing I actually heard in that whole upbringing was do unto others and love others. This as you would have done unto yourself, or as you love yourself, that half of the equation, like it just never came through in the way that was all taught to me, and the culture that was around that. And it wasn't until I was well into my adulthood that I was like, oh, as you love yourself. Oh, as you love yourself? Like that whole, it was like I had this whole mentality of give, 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 it's serve, 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 help, help, help. And it wasn't until, forces came together to put me in a place where I was in need that I realized that there's two sides to that coin. And unless we are able to receive, we're not able to give. And giving also puts us in a place where we're able to receive. And so that reciprocity, I feel like, is really broken oftentimes in this culture.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that view this are entrepreneurs or founders. And many of them, as we talked about a little before, have their own childhood trauma. Yep. And I know you grew up with an entrepreneurial father.
Yep.
And in a rural upbringing. And so how did that experience kind of shape where you're at today?
Oh, many ways, many ways. And I think the last time we chatted, I shared with you a bit about my story. And I grew up on a popcorn farm in southern Indiana. And that was a time in the 80s when microwave popcorn was just taking off, and microwave popcorn was new and the hot new thing. And my dad was a farmer, but he was very entrepreneurial by nature. And so he was all in, and we had our own brands and, company, and he was growing it, like just by leaps and bounds. And he was also kind of this guy that everything he'd ever touched and everything he'd ever done had been successful. He had a farm machinery sales business and had done all sorts of ventures. And he was just kind of like, he was kind of the man, and he was out there and he was doing it. And, he came from a culture, especially that generation and the generations before it, the whole Midwest ethos around men. And I heard him say it, I heard my grandfather say it, was men are providers. And what you do is you provide for your family. And he was successful at that business until he wasn't. And he made some bad decisions, he made some risky moves, and things fell apart for him, and his marriage fell apart, his business fell apart. And, what he believed about himself, and this is part of what we were talking about earlier with intrinsic and extrinsic goals and worth. It was like, whoa, I'm called to be a provider. That's my role. And now that everything has failed, I can't provide. And so the only way that he saw to provide for me and my siblings was to take his own life and collect his life insurance policy. But he was also very angry. He was very angry that things fell apart. And I don't think it was too devastating for him to acknowledge that he was the one that had made the bad moves. So he needed somebody to blame for that. And so he blamed his business partner and, ended his life in the way that now, since that time, many middle-aged men, especially middle-aged white men, have chosen to end their lives in a shooting spree. Because he was just so angry and so disoriented and so hopeless. And so, that that put me in a very, very different place in my relationship and my understanding of masculinity and manhood, and what it meant to be a man and what kind of man I wanted to grow up to be. So that really set the tone for my whole journey. And also that trauma that I experienced. When you live in a small town and your father makes national news in such a spectacular and dramatic way, I mean, you can't really run from that. You can't hide from that. Everybody knows your story. My response to that trauma really is what set me on the journey that's led me to where I'm at now. Mm-hmm. And it has been a very unexpected, wild, interesting, that sometimes brutally difficult journey. But I'm also very grateful for it.
Wow. Well, I just want to take a second to just honor what you just said. That's an incredibly difficult thing. And we're having a very American kind of conversation here where your father was a mass shooter. I've witnessed a mass shooting.
Yeah.
We're just like two dudes that happen to know each other.
Yeah.
So that's, a lot about our own culture, and it says a lot about you. I mean, I found with people when they, do the work and finally heal, they look at these things as blessings, really. And I look at my trials because I can be empathetic to a variety of people because I've had a variety of different things. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
And you've set yourself off on sort of a life of service based on, a trauma that it happened to you, but maybe not directly, and it informed your life. And so it really is an amazing thing to see. I mean, I think if we can look at our lives as sort of this hero's journey, mm-hmm. and then say like, well, these are the thing, like this is what makes you a hero, right? I mean, if nothing ever happened to you, like what would you have been like?
Yeah.
Like,
no way to know.
Yeah.
No way to know.
But I mean, it does, I think when, at least to orient around when you're maybe not feeling as healed from it and you're feeling victimized, because you definitely can. And mm-hmm. I know what it feels like to feel like just internally bad inside for really the behaviors of other people.
Yeah.
Now my own behaviors started to compound it and I got to feel bad about my own shit too. But it is a way to say, look, this is what I'm here to overcome. This is mm-hmm. my soul's journey, my contract. Like, this is the moment.
Yeah.
Where, like, once I realized that this happened for me,
yeah.
To be the man, the woman that I want to be, maybe it can start to move in the direction of you healing yourself, and what can you give back from that?
Yeah. And there were aspects of how that impacted me, took me, over 30 years to heal. Mm-hmm. And that healing was a long process. But then the other side of it was that there were things that it made me very aware of and very conscious of that I wouldn't have been, and very intentional about, that I wouldn't have been otherwise. Mm-hmm. I can remember thinking as a fourth grader, because I was 8 years old, I was in third grade when that happened. I remember thinking as a fourth grader, well, I guess there's nobody here to show me what it means to be a man. So I guess I'm going to have to figure this out on my own, and I'm going to carve my own path. Wow. Which is a pretty intense thought for a fourth grader.
Right.
But I can remember thinking that. And I have had a lot of intentionality, a lot of consciousness around my own masculinity and what it means to be a healthy, balanced man. Mm-hmm. How to be a healthy, balanced husband, partner, how to be an engaged and present father, mm-hmm. Because of that. And, I always say, like, if I could go back and say one thing to my father, just one thing, if I only had one sentence, I would go back and say, we need your presence more than we need your provision. Mm. That whole culture that taught him he had to be a provider. And I think that's made me, the gap that it opened up in me has made me very intentional about just being present in my own life, being present with my wife, being present with my 4 kids. And, for a while there was an unhealthy side. It's like, I'm going to give them the father I didn't have.
Right.
That kind of thing. And I'm going to be the man he couldn't be, or whatever it is. And, I've worked through that. And, so I'm, not that I think that had to happen or it needed to happen or was fated, but I am grateful that I've been able to learn some of the things that are the most important things about who I am and how I want to be because of that trauma in my life. And that's one thing too that I think men have a hard time with the way we talk about trauma. And the mental health space, especially, you know, in the counseling space, there's kind of this narrative out there right now. It's like, you have experienced trauma, therefore you are traumatized. The end. Mm-hmm. And you will carry that trauma with you for the rest of your life, and you have PTSD. Now, there's certain traumas that are of a caliber that some people do carry it with them their whole life. But I don't think just because you've experienced trauma, you are by default traumatized and you will be traumatized for life.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it sometimes, I'll give the analogy of pruning a bush, right? When you go out and prune a bush, when you really prune a bush, I mean, it looks like you're killing it. And it is a physical trauma to that bush. And whenever you get done from it, you're like, oh man, that thing's never coming back. But that gaps that have been opened up from that trauma of being pruned create space for new growth and new life. And sometimes the life that comes back from it is healthier than what was there before, which is the whole point of pruning.
Right.
And I look not only at that event, but some of the other really significant, the most difficult spots in my life. And for whatever reason, I also look back at those points as the moments of the most growth and the most healing for me. And I've had several other pretty significant traumas, you know. And for whatever reason, as hard as they were and as painful as they were, they've been areas that have brought out strengths and capacities in me that I don't think I would have otherwise had.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the whole reason why we're sitting here is my view that you can heal from these traumas. You know, sometimes this just notion of feeling inside of yourself that you don't even really deserve it. You know, that you're bad from like what happened to you. I know that's been a running dialogue in my mind. And I also want to open the space up for like to say, I feel healed from my traumas and things come up from them all the time. And, and as we were talking about, like health is more a system or a process than a state. Really, what it is I am able now when something new comes up. I mean, my sexual abuse came up in hypnosis, so I've known about it for 3 years, and I still get new memories popping up and all that, and different things where I'm feeling it. And what is different is it's not this sort of overwhelming feeling like it's just me being this fucked up bad person again. It's like, oh, I know how to well, let me get curious about this. What is this? Oh, this is shame. Like, well, how do I work with shame? How do, like that kind of thing. And it's created like a resiliency to say that I can deal with what, like you said, what still comes up, and I would imagine it will, come up over my life. Because your psyche, presents it to you when you're ready for it, and also a confidence in saying, like, the next thing that comes out, like, I know what to do.
Yeah.
And I really think as you're talking about, like, what men could look for, the providing part, I mean, in this culture, in the world that we operate in, our kids are pretty safe probably in our neighborhoods. And, what are their real threats? It's probably more anxiety and depression and mental illness. And to be able to provide them with this sense of, one, that they can bring something to their father or mother, and have a safe space, and they can see their father or mother overcome things and have difficulties and sort of fall down. That's providing them something that's, I think, more valuable than giving them a little multifamily complex or whatever, and so I think that there's an opportunity to like redefine what it is to be a man in this culture. To say, like, because we're in this dynamic world where, thank God, now more women go to college than men. Women are, nearly make the same amount of money as men. What can a man do to provide in maybe an arrangement where his wife makes more money than him? Well, there's a certain kind of male leadership that a father can provide, and a partner that is male can provide. And if we can start to value that As much as, look, I mean, I want to leave my kids money and all that, but I think a tool, emotional intelligence, if I left them with that tool, that's going to serve them probably best of all the things that I could do for them as a father.
Yeah, you just hit on 10 points that I'm like, oh, I want to, I have something to say about
Cool.
that. Like these are some of my real passion areas. Dialing back closer to the beginning of what you just said, talking about most of our kids are growing up in an environment where they're actually quite safe, right? And yet there's never been as high a rates of depression and anxiety and mental health challenges in teens and adolescents as there are right now. And then the question is why, right? Why would they feel so unsafe if the world is safer than it's ever been? And it really is. And I mean, we could point to a few hot button issues to say, well, this is worse. And there are some things that are worse, but overall, kids are about as safe as they've ever been. But let's kind of connect our biology with where we started the conversation out about connection and community and belonging. Let's think more from evolutionary and biological terms. As a species, look, we don't have fangs or claws. We don't run that fast. We don't jump that high. We don't have rhino armor. We don't have poison. We don't have quills. We're really pretty vulnerable sacks of meat compared to most animals. We're really not that impressive. We can't even go out and be in the cold without clothes on. We are pretty vulnerable. So how is it that we really became the apex species on this planet? It doesn't make a ton of sense. And now one of the things that normally gets pointed to is these big old brains we have. And that's part of it, right? We're really good problem solvers, and this big complex brain we have, it's an asset. It can also be a liability in a lot of other ways. But there's another side to this, is that our strategy, our survival strategy as a species is to belong to the group. And throughout most of human history, we have been in groups of 50 to 150 individuals that we knew, that we trusted, that we would fight for, that we knew would fight for us, that we had diversified roles and diversified skills so that we could differentiate task and behave really almost like an ant colony in that diversified task where it's we are stronger and we are safer as the collective than we are as the individual. I mean, we're not snow leopards here that spend 95% of their time alone and occasionally saunter out of the mountains to mate, and spend the rest of our time hunting,
Right.
We are a social species. If I could recommend one book to most American men to read, it would be Tribe by Sebastian Junger. He goes deep, deep, deep into our history as a species, our evolutionary biology, and why we are experiencing so many mental health challenges because of our modern lifestyle. He crushes it. It's such a good book. So you take that, and now you take our teens, and where is their tribe? Where is their community? We are surrounded by people, but traditionally we had a smaller group of people that we knew very intimately and we could trust. Now we're awash with all these people who are effectively strangers that we only feel superficial connection with, and a lot of the connection we do have now is virtual. There is nothing in our history or our biology as a species that says, oh yeah, being completely alone makes you, that's safe. The toll of isolation isn't just psychological, it's physical and physiological. And again, if it were just absolute physical threat, and we are more physically safe and healthy in some ways than we've ever been before in history, why are we falling apart? And it is loneliness and it is isolation because we do not have a tribe or a community around us that we know we truly belong to. And when we don't have a sense of belonging, it just sends our psychology and our physiology haywire. And we're just falling apart as a society. I like to say we're all collectively alone here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Neurogrove has been kind enough to sponsor my podcast launch event, and I'm just working on the invites and all that. But the name of it is going to be Connection is the Medicine. And even though we're talking about psychedelics in the talk itself, to me, what psychedelics have done is allow a stripping away and me to hear some of my inner wisdom to point me in the direction of more wholeness. And really what I found is it's less about grow this and add this to yourself. And it's more like, can we strip away this? Can we get down to your real essential light? And then if people see that, you'll feel good.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that all of this is intertwined. So let's say, you're walking in, you got that entrepreneur, that founder, he walks into your office, him or her, and just says, I want to be a better partner, a better leader, a better father or mother, and I feel stuck, right? It looks great on the outside. How do you kind of say, all right, let's look at the next 3 months and what can we do there? And then, how do you work with someone like that to kind of make it's a whole system change?
Yeah. This is an important one. And initially what I'm going to say could sound kind of, I don't know, I'll say hokey or trite or cliche or like, a stereotypical Instagram, kind of thing. But stick with me. I promise what I'm saying is more than that.
It will end up brilliant at some point.
It'll at least end up something more than that. It is, and this is going to link back to one of the last things you said in the earlier thing that I had. I said I had so many things to say about. You said something to the effect of, like people not believing that they're actually worth their own healing, right? I have seen that be such a core feature, especially in my work with ketamine-assisted therapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy, also with biofeedback. It has come up again and again and again in those spaces where after we've worked together for a bit, it comes up as some people don't believe that they actually deserve to be healthy, deserve to be whole. Right? They haven't earned it. They don't deserve it. And breaking down that whole mentality of like, I have to deserve this. I have to earn it. I have to be worthy of health and healing. That is such a huge impediment. So a lot of people who are in this space as like founders and entrepreneurs, like ambitious folk, a lot of times it is a lack of self-worth, oftentimes stemming from trauma that is driving them to be so driven. Right? And then there is a very deep lacking of self-awareness and self-worth that's there. And what happens is if we are extrinsically focused and extrinsically motivated, then we're trying to surround ourselves by all of these things that we have done to say, see, look at me, I'm worthy. I've done it. Look at what a good guy I am. See, like for me, the way that popped up was, my father was a businessman, so I started a nonprofit. My father was an entrepreneur. I wanted to give everything away. He wanted to be successful and I wanted to be a servant. That was my rebellion. But still, what was I trying to do? I was doing the same thing he did. I was just doing it in a different way. I thought I was being so different than him, but I was doing the same thing, which is look at all these things I'm doing. I'm showing you, I'm proving to you all what a good guy I am. And if I'm a good guy, you will love me and I will belong, right? So the hardest thing, it sounds easy in, an Instagram post, but putting yourself at the center of your own life and actually valuing yourself as worthy of health and healing is so central. And it's easy to say. And at first people will be like, oh, yeah. But dude, it's hard for a lot of people to overcome. The example that I use for this that a lot of people connect with is, when you're on the flight and they say, if you're traveling with children, put on your oxygen mask first and then assist the person beside you. It's that simple. put on your own oxygen mask first. And what people don't understand is that when you actually take time to care for yourself, to love yourself, and put yourself at the center of your life, when you actually nourish yourself, then you begin to produce fruit to share with other people, right? But what so many of us are doing, we are pushing ourselves to the red line. We are giving ourselves away. We're burning the candle at both ends, and we're giving people the leftovers of ourselves, right? And we are cheating ourselves out of life, and we're cheating the people we love out of our life. So it sounds so simple and trite and cliche, but the first thing you have to do is realize this is my life and this life is for me. Now, having grown up in the Midwest, having grown up in evangelical Protestant Christianity, right? That can sound for people coming from a background like mine to be so egocentric, so self-centered, right? And it sounds so noble to say like, oh, I'm just live my life for others. No. Remember that love your neighbor as you love yourself? Right. As you love yourself, you have so much more to give. And as you learn to give to others, you're more generous with yourself. And as you're more generous with yourself, you have more to give. It's this positive feedback loop of healing. And so making the decision to seek out care and then to actually follow through with it. And then to stick with it, whatever it is that you need. Sounds so simple, but it's so hard. What I usually see, a pattern I usually see with a lot of men is I am going to wait until the breaking point when I can hold it off no longer to ask for help. And then I'm going to give myself permission to get just enough help that I don't die. And that was my story as well. In that I held off and I held off and I held off of dealing with the dark side of my trauma. I mean, I was very intentional about it, and I was very open and I talked about it. I worked through it a lot, but still there were some aspects of it I couldn't deal with on my own. And I had to get to the point where I started to have like passive suicidal ideation as I approached about that same age that my dad was at when he took his own life.
Wow, that must have been intense.
And as soon as I had those first few thoughts, I was like, I know where this is headed and I know what this looks like. And at that point in my life, I had never used any illicit compounds. I'd never used cannabis. I'd probably only been drunk maybe 4 or 5 times in my life. These substances just were not a part of my life, and I didn't really need them, whatever. And because of I'd read the studies on psilocybin in medical school, and I'd read some books afterwards, How to Change Your Mind and this, that, and the other. And there we go, right there. And there was something about it, I think the spiritual nature of it, because I've always been a very spiritual person. I remember thinking, which was totally out of character for me, if you ever need help, that's the medicine for you. I just felt it. And when I got to that point, and this was before legalization here in Colorado and everything, when it came time, I was like, I know what I need, and I'm going to make the decision to do something bold and out of character and just for me. And my first psilocybin therapy session was the most transformational point in my life and the best decision I've ever made for myself. But making that decision for me, making it for me and for no one else, was actually part of the process. So whether it's the decision to have ketamine therapy or psilocybin-assisted therapy, or just to go to counseling or have biofeedback therapy, or even create a morning meditation or breathwork routine, or to join a men's group so that you don't feel alone, all of those start with the simple decision, my life matters. I deserve healing, not because of what I have done, but because I am me. And I'm going to do what I need to do to put myself back at the center of my own life.
Yeah.
No matter what your path of healing is, it starts with that decision.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's funny, I was thinking about something on a similar vein just today. And I was abused at a church, and I had a kind of a Christian upbringing as well, and I just rejected that, because of that thing, and wasn't a priest. But as life has gone on, and I think psychedelics help with this, but as I've just become feeling a little more like my truer self, I've oriented around this idea that, there's a source, there's just this like loving, creative energy that I'm part of, that I came here to be a part of, that I'm going back to. And, what it's helped me to do is to feel like a couple things. One, that like, what an honor that I have this body. I am here because I've come out of this, like this all-empowering source, and I'm here to kind of like learn something and maybe add to the wisdom of that source, right? So to be respectful of it and say like, what an amazing, I can't remember the stats, but the likelihood of us being human on this planet is like 8 trillion to 1 or something, some sort of number on that. So that, and the fact that, so that helps me to feel more like reverent of my body and to try to do stuff just for that. But the other part of it is like that I want to be an engine for growth, that I can actually add to the collective wisdom and knowledge that, when I pass on, I can help other people see things, and I can do that. So it's just really framed my life in a way where it's sort of saying it's about me, but it's like, but me is part of this collective that I am a part of and that I can honor.
Yeah, and that echoes back to where the conversation began today about that reciprocity, right? There's a great word, I believe if I remember it correctly, it comes from the Xhosa language, which is one of the tribes in southern Africa.
Hey, quick pause before we keep going. If this conversation is landing with you, become part of the Neuro's Journey community by subscribing and following along for more stories like this of courage and the science of healing. I'd love for you to drop a comment below and share what part of the episode hit home for you. The more we share, learn, and show of ourselves, the more we heal.
And the word is Ubuntu. And Ubuntu, the translation that I've read that I really like of this word, it's not just a word, it's a whole philosophy that culture centers around. But it's the translation in English is, I am who I am because of who we are together. And that's also kind of like your cheerleader pyramid and stuff. It recognizes that I am who I am, but I am who I am because of who we are together. And I love the recognition of both like our individuality, but then also the fact that we are part of a collective reality on multiple levels that's far beyond just ourselves. I say it over and over again. Our health does not end at the border of our skin. It does not end at the border of our skin. It's dependent on our environment, our society, on our relationships, on our sense of meaning and purpose and how we interact with the world. Health is so much more than having good values on your annual lab draw. Those things are important too, but it's just one piece of a huge puzzle. And I think you spoke really eloquently to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking it was funny. I was like, yeah, this cat's a doctor. He's quoting African parables, and I'm doing cheerleader pyramid. Maybe that's why there's no letters after my name.
but it works. It works. It's a great example.
Thank you.
Like everybody has their individual role to play in that, and but then again, there's no pyramid unless everybody's working together. So yeah. I love all levels of metaphors. Some of my favorites are the most basic ones.
So I wanted to kind of, so we're in Colorado, and maybe you can, talk a little bit about like what is legal in psychedelic therapy and what's not. Give people who don't understand what is going on here, lay of the land. And really, like where you see psychedelics play as a tool to wholeness and thriving.
Yeah, I mentioned my first psilocybin therapy experience and how transformational it was, and it has been a continued process for me over the last 3.5 years that has been, just an amazing process. And I can truly say right now, I feel that I am my best self that I've ever been. This is the best I have ever felt. And I mean, life is still challenging, and I'm far from perfect, but I just am really at peace with who I am because of this medicine and the process that it's led me through. And some points of that process were breathtakingly hard. But I'm so grateful. And I had the good fortune of having that first experience August of 2022, which is just a few months before the Natural Medicines Health Act passed here in Colorado, or what was called Prop 122 at the time. And so that law, it's a very dynamic law in that on one side of the equation, it really opens up personal use. And so personal, communal, and traditional use, it's pretty much all fair game in here in Colorado. So anybody can grow, possess, consume, and share natural medicines. Now, as a naturopathic doctor, I kind of hate this term natural medicines because like natural medicines means a lot more than natural psychedelics. But I think they called it the Natural Medicine Health Act, and they refer to it as natural medicine here to kind of take away that psychedelic label, which is a trigger for some people. So it's more of a political move than an actual reality. So what that means, what is defined as natural medicine here in Colorado are the compounds psilocybin, which is what's present in magic mushrooms, psilocybe cubensis mushrooms. Then there is ibogaine, which comes from the iboga plant, which is an African psychedelic. There's DMT, which is present in ayahuasca brews, but then also like 5-MeO DMT in what's found in the toad medicine, if you're familiar with that. Let's see, I've covered ibogaine, I've covered psilocybin. Oh, mescaline, but specifically non-peyote mescaline. So peyote is the traditional cactus that was used by Native American traditions for their peyote ceremonies. Peyote is not the only source of mescaline. So one thing Colorado did that was really good was protect peyote for indigenous use only, but mescaline can also be found naturally in like the San Pedro cactus. So natural medicine here in Colorado and what's protected for use here in the state are those 4 compounds. Now the other side of it is the clinical use portion. And the clinical use portion is not so open and flexible, and it's much more regulated and bureaucratic, which is challenging. So to access that medicine here in Colorado, you have to go to a licensed healing center and work with a licensed facilitator. So when that act passed, I went through a training program with the Integrative Psychiatry Institute here in Boulder, set myself up. I really wanted to be one of the first licensed facilitators here in the state, and I wanted to have one of the first licensed healing centers. So I've spent most of the last 3 years in pursuit of that, on top of, juggling everything else in my life. And so happy to say, one of the first licensed facilitators in the state, and also just 2 months ago, got our healing center and cultivation license and launching that this month.
Wow. So,
in one way, mission accomplished, but the work's just beginning. Right? It has been a long, cumbersome, bureaucratic, convoluted, costly journey to get here. But here we are, and it's time to do the work. But I did, because of the way the law was written over the last few years, I was able to guide people in psilocybin work. I'm also a ketamine-assisted therapist that I do at Neuro. But then now that I'm licensed, I can only do that in the license framework. So I'm not sure if I answered all your question, but there's
that's a great overview of what's going on. And then how do you, when someone walks in and is telling you about their life, how do you determine that psychedelics might be something they would be interested in? How do you choose them? And I will just give you a little experience with me, and you can tell me how you're different than that. I did ketamine. I don't know if it was exactly a ketamine. I didn't know anything about this, right? So essentially did a little bit of intake and told my trauma history. And I have a very addictive history, I was a crack addict, all these things. And then essentially I did ketamine with a nurse practitioner and her company where they essentially just made me safe.
Yeah.
There was no real process to it, no integration. And now that I know a little bit more about ketamine, and I do think it's an addictive drug, I think I should have been told that, given your history, just so it doesn't have to turn out that way. So I guess that's a two-part question, but how do you do it right, and how do you determine who to do it right for?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I think the easiest place to start is to say it's psychedelic-assisted therapy, right? It's not psychedelic treatment. And what I hear you describing, and this is unfortunately a reality, it's a common reality, is that a lot of the ketamine-assisted therapy is not ketamine-assisted therapy, it's ketamine treatment, where people are going into places and, being given ketamine, somebody's monitoring their vitals, but they're pretty much having the experience in a dark room by themselves. That is not therapy. Like, that's treatment like any other medicine. And so one of the challenges with psychedelic-assisted therapies is that it can be a bit of a forced fit in the medical model, right? Because the medical model is all about treatment. You have a problem, here's the treatment treats the problem goes away. Psychedelics are really a catalyst for a process, a healing process. And you need a therapeutic component to guide you and help you navigate that terrain. So for it to truly be a psychedelic-assisted therapy, first there needs to be an evaluation at the beginning that says, like, are you a good candidate for this? And if so, which is the right compound for you? Because the strengths of psilocybin are different than the strengths of ketamine, which are different than the strengths of MDMA, which are different than the strengths of ibogaine. But then also, from a medical perspective, you have to assess risk as well. Like, for instance, if somebody has even if I think ketamine would be good for somebody psychologically, if they have hypertension, like uncontrolled hypertension, if they have cardiovascular disease, they recently had a stroke or a heart attack or something like that, I'm not going to recommend ketamine for them because it's going to increase their heart rate and their blood pressure, and we could precipitate a cardiac event. Okay. Not a good decision. So really the things that people should be looking for is, first, some sort of an evaluation to make sure that that therapy is safe, and that also they're using the compound that is most in alignment with what their needs and their goals are and their history is. And there are differences between these compounds. It's not one size fits all by any means. And if you've had experience with these compounds, they are dramatically different in their nature and the way they work. So that's part of it. Really good psychedelic-assisted therapy is going to have, part of it is going to be preparation. Preparation is before actually receiving the medicine or the compound, beginning to prepare psychologically for the experience, knowing what to expect, providing really good informed consent, and helping to develop rapport between the therapist and the client or the patient, and creating really an environment of safety and trust. That preparation process leads into administration. Administration is when you actually receive the compound. And again, if it's ketamine, you're going to have maybe an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hour experience. If it's psilocybin, you're going to have a 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 hour experience. So the administration is really different based on dose and compound. But then this is the thing I'm very passionate about, is integration. I think I said this to you earlier, but I always say, psychedelics can lead you to the door and can unlock the door, but you are the one who walks through the door. And then after you walk through the door, there's all this new terrain on the other side.
100%.
It is a catalyst for change. It is not a silver bullet, and it's not a panacea. See, we have this mindset from our medical model. I have depression. I am going to take Prozac. Prozac is going to treat my depression. Depression is going to go away. That is not how these medications work. This is not the way I think that we use them effectively and responsibly. It is a catalyst to take somebody who is stuck in a pattern, in an unhealthy or self-destructive pattern, and to create the neuroplasticity, which is the mental and neurological flexibility to be able to adapt and grow and change, and the neurogenesis that it induces to be able to create new pathways to reinforce those new patterns of behavior. But like, if you don't have therapy to guide that and to encourage and foster that growth and change, you're catalyzing a process that's not being seen through, right? And so what's going to happen? It's going to be this yo-yo, like we're seeing with a lot of these, ketamine mills, where, people go through, maybe their first 10 or 12 sessions and they feel a ton of relief of the symptoms, right? But they actually haven't addressed the root cause. They haven't addressed the trauma. They haven't addressed the self-destructive patterns that have resulted from that trauma. And so then they get on a treadmill of, well, I just got to come in every 4 weeks for a maintenance dose. Right? So there's still that same thing like taking an SSRI, suppressing symptoms, but not actually healing. So I'm really passionate about this idea that this is psychedelic-assisted therapy. It's therapy first and foremost. And the medicine helps take us to a place. It gives us access to parts of our mind that we aren't normally able to access. It also gives us a sense of safety that we can process the things that in a normal state of consciousness we're not able to. So, yeah, get off my soapbox there, but
no,
I feel really strongly about this.
It's really important. I mean, and there's a lot to unpack there. As someone who's had quite a bit of healing from it, who's also sort of learned a lot more about it over time, and blessed to be engaged now to a, world thought leader on psychedelics. So I know a lot more about it. A couple things there. I always try to caution people about this medicine, it's just going to cure you vibe. I will say, though, there is something about it, especially if you're in that stuck and I can never change thing, where you can get this incredible inspiration and you can really change. And, honestly, I learned that integration was important just fully by accident. I mean, I had a a therapy psychedelic event at a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert. I had a lot of downloads, which are still very important learnings to me in my life, happen there. And I got COVID. And we were at the time when you still quarantined for like 2 weeks. So really what happened in that is, like, one of the major lessons that I learned is, one, what came through is you're not damaged, you're not broken, the world isn't out to get you. And the other thing was, if you would just relax a little bit and listen to this voice, this calm one that is wise inside of you, your life will be better. And I was in my bed, and I was just like writing and doing, and from that time, that's 2 weeks of integrating forced,
Yeah.
The behaviors in my life have changed radically. I mean, I'm 40 or 50 pounds lighter. I haven't had a drink since that day. I'm an active yoga practitioner. I've met the woman I love. My whole network of people have changed. I mean, many dramatic things have happened. And it's really that they kind of gave me a little bit of insight into, I have my own inner wisdom.
Yeah.
And that is my kind of true north. And if I really can tap into that, and for me, it's very easy to tell the difference, because I do have the fearful, traumatized little Steve voice, but that's more like a screamer and a yeller.
Yeah.
And the wise part of me is more kind of wise and calm and not begging me to do what I do. Yeah. And my life has just gotten so much better since I, without question, just when I hear that little thing that feels like this is good for you, I don't over research it. I just do it. And I really credit psychedelics for at least pointing me that inside of me I have that.
Yeah. No, you've hit on, and that's a good counterpoint to what I was saying. It brings kind of what I was saying into balance. And I'm sure, as people were listening to what I said, in the last bit, they were saying, oh, well, I did a journey on my own, and, I had all these insights and I grew and benefited. And yeah, absolutely. That happens. That absolutely happens. There are a lot of people, I guess one of the reasons I'm passionate about that is, especially the people who are approaching this on the clinical side of things, oftentimes are in a place where they really are not going to have that kind of an experience without support. But regardless, whether this is a solo endeavor or if this is like a clinical guided endeavor, you hit on this concept of like inner healing intelligence or inner healing wisdom. And that is really central in both the personal use and the clinical space. And it is amazing. I have seen it time and time again in my own experiences, but then also all the people that I've worked with, that your mind knows exactly what you need to heal.
Exactly.
It knows exactly what you need to heal. Now, in the moment, sometimes you're like, not this, anything but this, like, why would you show me this? Or that doesn't make any sense. But it is, I have come to deeply appreciate that, like, I like the fact that we call it being a facilitator, right? Even more than a guide sometimes, because it's like, you're the one, your inner healing intelligence is doing the work. I'm just facilitating and creating a container for that process to happen.
Yeah.
And I deeply respect every person that I do this work with, because their mind comes up with exactly what they need to be able to go through their process. And it's unique for every single person. Even the same person, like session to session or journey to journey, can be a completely different experience. But one of my standard lines is, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need.
All right.
In this space.
Bring a little stones
Bring a little
into
stones
it. I
in
like
there.
that. Yeah, and it's interesting because when you say that, what I think, like, my goal with psychedelics is for people my wish for people is they combine the insights and revelations with behavior change that accompany that.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're, of course, and I know many people have had these insights and wisdoms, and they seem so intense and so true. And then if you don't really write them down and really even just drive the insight in, you can start to forget the insight, And so I think it's like a way, I think what you're saying is, let's get your insights and your psyche's internal wisdom, and let me help you create a container to turn that wisdom into actionable things that change your and your family's life.
Yeah, and you've probably already heard this, with your connection to the field, but the metaphor that gets used a lot in the psychedelic-assisted therapy space is, imagine like your brain is like a snow day. And, like, you remember when you're a kid and you wake up and, you got a hill in your yard and, oh man, it's a snow day, and you go out, and the first few times you go down the hill, you're just like packing the snow and making a track. And it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort. But after you've sledded it a few times, it gets faster and faster, and then it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more efficient. And then maybe you get bored with that and you make another track, 2 or 3 tracks or whatever. Whenever our brain is developing, whenever we're young, we're literally creating neural pathways, actual physical pathways within our brain. And that's a lot of work. It's very energy intensive. And once we create those pathways, they're a lot more efficient and they're a lot more effective than trying to build a new pathway. So the patterns that get built up in us whenever we are young, we tend to stick with those, right? Because creating a new pathway is really expensive for the brain. And so, but the problem is that the pathways that develop whenever we're 5 and 10 and 15 in a different environment, in a different era, maybe a different part of the country, they may have served us well then, but they don't necessarily serve us well as 40, 45, 50-year-old adults in a different part of the country with a completely different life. But we're still sledding on the old tracks, right? And this is like especially childhood trauma. That's why it's had such a huge impact on our life throughout our entire lifespan. So whenever we have these psychedelic experiences and we induce neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, it's like waking up on a new snow day, right? And all the old tracks are there under the snow, but you have this fresh blanket of potentiality. I could sled anywhere. And the reason that I am so insistent about this integration piece is not everybody has the wherewithal like you did to lay in bed and recreate their life. Some people do. Not everyone does. The easiest thing in the world is for us after a psychedelic experience like this to say, well, I know I used to always sled here and that seemed to work pretty good, so I'm going to go back and I'm just going to and the old track is under there anyway, so I'll just go back and just fall into my old patterns, right? It takes intention and it takes effort. It takes work to explore new pathways and build new pathways in our brain. So this integration piece is all about how do we let go of the pathways that are no longer serving us well and create a new network of connections and pathways within our brain so we can break out of the old patterns of stuckness and really create a new version of ourselves. And so that's why that integration piece is so important. But because we've been so medicalized in our thinking, we think it's all about that administration day. The medicine is just going to fix me. And it's like, no, that medicine is opening a door of potential. Right? And yeah, I mean, we're going to discharge emotions. We're going to make the, connections. We're going to see things more clearly. We're going to come to understanding during that really beautiful, really dramatic, intense experience. But if we don't actually change and we don't reorient our lives around our values and grow into a new, healthier version of ourselves, then that's all it was. It was just an experience. And I think we all need more than that.
Right. What you want to make it is a life-changing experience,
Absolutely.
not an experience.
Absolutely.
That's a big difference, yes.
I don't think we should settle for anything less than that.
It's so true. And just as somebody who's had all of those things, from experiences to life-changing experiences, psychedelics are an incredibly powerful tool. I don't know that I would have been able to sit and actually love and forgive the man who sexually abused me as a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Unless I was under the influence of MDMA with somebody who, she doesn't call it a guide, she calls herself a witness. Mm-hmm. She's like with you there, and she's helping you a little bit. But those tools are profound, and they can shake things up. But it's, again, you're still you, and you gotta do the work after.
Yeah, and you said MDMA is what helped you with that, mm-hmm. And again, this is one of the reasons it's important to know the compounds and their different strengths. When I think about social, relational, and sexual trauma, mm-hmm. that's one of the areas that MDMA is really the all-star.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely, it shines above the rest. And it's, people ask me questions like, well, which one's the best? And it's like, depends who you are and depends what you need, depends what your history is, right? I think of, and these are oversimplifications, but I tend to think of ketamine more as the comforter, right? It is the one that helps create a safer and gentler container for most people, for them to go in and begin to do their internal work. There's a lot of physiological benefits with ketamine too, that it's maybe a different conversation. Psilocybin for me is more of a challenger, right? It is going to go in and shine a spotlight on everything in your life that doesn't make sense and reveal it to you and challenge it to call you out into something more. MDMA is really the healer in the sense, in a relational way, mm-hmm. right? That connection with other people, especially people who have been deeply wounded by other human beings. Healing that connection between yourself and others. That's MDMA, that's where it really shines. So each of these medicines has a very distinct role and profile. And again, they show up in different ways for different people, and these are oversimplifications, but it's important to have somebody who's informed about this so you get to the right compound and engage with it in the right way first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
especially if you're kind of a civilian and you haven't really been in this world. I kind of grew up, I was, seeing the Grateful Dead. I had a very different path on substances than you did. But for somebody, I think, who is new to this and working in a clinical environment with somebody who's a doctor, who understands their physiology, who can work with them over time. I mean, that's the move, right? I hear so many people like, oh, I know a guy, I'm going to do it, and kind of, earlier in my, world of this, I would have said, go for it. But now I'm much more, even though I'm a big proponent of it, I'm much more kind of reticent to say just like run out and do it. Like you need to really kind of think about it, and hopefully this will be, there'll be more and more access and people can come and visit you, and hopefully you'll get some people coming from this interview. So, there's a lot of ways to change your neural pathways, right? And so psychedelics are one, but you've been quite like an adventurer as a person, And so how does adventure, nature, challenge kind of like support people on these paths?
Yeah, this is maybe a point that we can tie back into where we started the conversation about, more quote unquote masculine and feminine approaches. And again, I don't necessarily mean biological sex when I say those things. It's more almost like the Taoist concepts of yin and yang. When I say masculine and feminine, I think I like those terms better. So this more yang, this more masculine approach, like one thing I think is really missing in our approaches to mental health is challenge. Because our mental health models are more feminine or more yin in nature, it's more about creating a safe place where you can come in and feel safe and heal. And that's an important part of the process, right? So for instance, if you break your leg, we need to kind of have the more yin approach of giving it an environment with a cast, right? That keeps it stable, that keeps it safe so it can initially heal. You need to take weight off it and protect it by walking on crutches. But at a certain point, that bone is going to heal. And after it heals, you continue to wear a cast and you continue to use crutches. You're not actually making it stronger. You're causing it to atrophy. And it's getting weaker, right? So there comes a tipping point where you need to move from the feminine to the masculine or from the yin to the yang, right? And there has to be a place where we begin to challenge ourselves so that we can really build our strength back up. So this sense of like adventure and challenge for me has been really central. And it's been a big part of my healing process. I've told you a little bit about the trips that I've done with my sons. So I had this idea whenever I was still young. This was long, I think it was before I was married. Yeah, it was before I was married, definitely before I had kids. And I remember thinking, if and when I have kids, when they are the same age that I was whenever I lost my father, I want to put them through a challenge that is really challenging, but not challenging in the negative way like I experienced. I want to give them a positive challenge. And I want that experience to be something that evokes the best out of my child and out of me. So the way this planned out, I have 3 boys and a girl. And so with my oldest son, Asher, when he was 8 years old, I was telling you about how I was training for that with the statue story, right? So this is when we were starting to transition back to life in America, but I was still connected with my nonprofit and the work we were doing overseas. So we set up this fundraiser for our nonprofit so we could buy an ambulance for this one village. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up my events. We were sending village kids to medical school so we could have community doctors. And so basically what we trained together to do was we rode from a town in India called Manali, which is in the Indian Himalayas, on the Manali-Leh highway, which if you've ever seen that road, the world's most dangerous roads, this is like one of the roads that's always on those kind of shows, right? And we spent 15 days and we tandem biked the Manali to Leh highway. We crossed the second highest pass in the world, 17,660 feet. We slept in yak herder tents. We carried all of our own gear. We didn't have any support. And we cycled over the Himalayas onto the Tibetan plateau together. And he was 8 at the time.
Wow.
And it was just the most beautiful thing. Because for me too, it was like, I remember as we were approaching the pass, which was our big goal, this very high pass. And as it was within sight, I could see it. And we're slowly, we were at 50% of the oxygen to sea level there at that altitude. I'm just like, it's going to be hard for me to say without like really getting choked up. But I was like, you did it. You are the father. That you wanted for yourself. And that was important for me on a personal level, but also those 15 days of being together, just me and him, like out in the middle of nowhere, doing this crazy thing, pushing our bodies to the very limit of what we were capable of. That journey was just as healing as a psilocybin journey. And it healed parts of me that psilocybin maybe couldn't. And I needed to challenge myself, and I needed to prove to myself what my capacities were. But I also wanted to show my son the capacities he had.
Yeah.
And so since then, that was the first of the adventures. In our family, we call it the adventure. And not like that one too. It wasn't just my healing as an individual or my son, but we were also raising money to send village students to become doctors so they could come back and heal their villages. Like, healing doesn't end at the border of our skin.
Yeah.
Like, we are connected. And then it went on to with my second son, Shepherd. We biked from Lhasa, Tibet, across the Tibetan Plateau to Everest Base Camp North. 12 days in the saddle. And my third adventure with my third son, my youngest son, he said, no, I don't want to bike. I want to walk. I want to hike. And we hiked to Everest Base Camp.
Wow, so he didn't get the benefit of the tandem bike option, right?
No.
Yeah, he walked all of that himself.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, wow, impressive.
And so we made it all the way to Everest Base Camp, and then we climbed this mountain called Kalapatar together. And so, like, therapy isn't just sitting around in a room talking about your problems. Like, therapy can look like climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
Therapy can look like so many things. And I find the same thing with like meditation. Like, we have this idea of what therapy is. We have this idea of what meditation is. The first meditation I was ever able to do, because I have such an active, restless mind, was cycling, because I could push myself right to the ragged edge of what I could, handle, until my whole reality came down to right, left, right, left, right, left. Don't hit pothole, right, left. Right? It was the first time that I felt my mind become silent and clear and focused. And then cycling, led into other forms of meditation, and now I can just sit and be clear without having to push myself so hard. But I needed to challenge myself to develop that capacity. And so I feel like our mental health models oftentimes create safety for people to the point that it becomes coddling, right? And it doesn't call them back to a place of strength and a place of power. So that's one thing I like about psychedelics, is it will call you out.
They definitely won't coddle you.
It will not coddle you. It will not coddle you. And I think also that's why this whole kind of renaissance or revolution or whatever you want to name it in psychedelics, I notice this is what's bringing men back into the mental health space.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I want to face this thing.
It's interesting because when I hear your story, what arises for me, the reason why this is intentionally called the Neuro's Journey, because I think I told you before that I try to frame my journey in the hero's journey mindset, right? And it's studied and proven that people who do that have a higher meaning in their life, more happiness, all of these things. And when I hear your story for your young sons, that's like a textbook hero's journey, right? It's something hard. It's probably scary. When you come back from it, you got the goods to help your people out, and so you're teaching them all about that early. And for you, you got choked up there because it was so meaningful. And so, I mean, we don't know what's going on in the world, but the way that I frame your dad's story and what went on with that is he was giving you the basis of your hero's journey.
Absolutely.
And you've taken it and you've done so much good, and honestly, you could have become a drug addict, and all kinds of things could have happened from that story. So, I mean, it says a lot about you as a person and your way of dealing with that. So I really applaud you for that. And, I appreciate you talking about these things, in public. And then the other part of it that was interesting, you had this sort of thing about, well, if you go into a doctor for a broken leg, they do this and that. And one thing that, just completely shocks me as somebody who's, spent a lot of money and effort and time on mental health. And, I go in there and present a pretty drastic case. Nobody ever until this year said, well, why don't we take a look at your brain? It's insane, I think, and honestly, like, not only just having it done without any treatment protocol or anything is an important thing.
Yeah.
You get to see, like, okay, like, it's a changeable system and here's where I'm at. And, I mean, I think it's a pretty important part of it where, Tristram, who's your co-owner of Neuro, basically told me all about who I was just by looking at it.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and so I think that there's something about that, especially when now I'm, I think I'm 37 neurofeedback sessions in. And so I've had 3 scans, and my brain has moved dramatically in the end towards health, and my life has moved dramatically towards where I want to be and how I really feel like an opportunity to be the person that I know that I am inside. And I'll get choked up here, but the reactionary nature of my nervous system like caused this dynamic of me having all these behaviors that I'm just like, what the fuck was I doing? Like, why did I scream, or why did I do this, or why did I do that? And they didn't feel like part of like the real me, but this part of me that was damaged, it felt I was a damaged, broken unit, was like, oh yeah, that's it. You're not worthy of love. You're not the kind of person who deserves that. And here's evidence of it. Here's how you act. And really what I've found with this work, and I don't want to say it's all neuro, I mean, I do all kinds of things, and like we're talking about, I just look at it like a system, and I had a lot of bad inputs when I was young, so I'm trying to flood the zone now with better inputs, and things change. But the number one benefit is that I have had the ability to choose who I am. Yeah. Not react to what I did and so when I don't make great choices, because I still have some of those reactions, I definitely have the resilience to say the next day, like, hey, that wasn't me. That wasn't my highest self that I wanted to be there, and I'm sorry. But even more often is I'm able in that moment to just have a pause and like let in the wisdom that I have to inform my decisions and how I want to be. And it's such a blessing. And it's the kind of thing when we talk about a system, our families are also systems. So as you bring something new into it, as my energy has changed, as my ability to be at choice has improved, the system here has improved. Yeah. And I see Leah and I see Apollo. My daughter is in college and I see her less, but I hope it's happening for her too. But, you can jump in and you can do the work, and then all of a sudden it can help other people. And some of that thing, that what you were talking about, presence, it's nice to have also someone who has been a licensed therapist and worked in foster care and family therapy for 20 years to be my partner, to also say that the ground that I'm kind of creating with this less reactionary thing gives my kids the ability to say some things to me that might be difficult. Yeah. And it's interesting when that started happening this year, I was very able in a calm system to hear it, and I give myself grace. I think one of the things about orienting around this hero's journey is I can also say, I went through a lot of just heavy shit,
Yeah.
and so I can make a couple mistakes, reacting to it. So I didn't get into a shame spiral when they said it. I was able to just hear it. But the reflection that I got from Leah, which was amazing, is like, do you know how great this is? Like that they're able to say those things to you.
That they feel safe enough to.
That they feel safe enough
Yeah.
to bring up something that might be a little challenging. And, so that just feels like that's like the ratification of the work, and just the way that you were talking about being the father that you didn't get to have. I have those same issues with my dad, and my dad was there, but I get to be for them and sort of look at it like I'm helping to heal our lineage.
Yeah.
And actually, I think you're honoring your father in a way because your children are part of his lineage.
Yeah.
And so even though the difficult things of his actions that you had to deal with, you're, as part of this whole lineage, you're part of that healing.
Yeah.
And
there are two dimensions here to what you're talking about that I'm really connected with. And, what the language some people use to describe this is healing generational trauma, right? Which again can sound a little bit Instagram, a little bit cliche or something, or nebulous. Like, what does that even mean? But whenever like the patterns of your great grandfather that got imprinted on the behavior of your grandfather got imprinted on the behavior of your father that got imprinted on you, like these things get handed down because as small children, like we are looking to our parents. And our brain is observing everything, and we're developing, this is what a man looks like. This is how a father behaves. This is how a husband behaves. These are the things that are safe. These are the things that aren't safe. One of the heaviest lifts that we can do as an individual is to make the decision to break the cycle of generational trauma. And every person who makes that decision, it's like I have so much respect for. Because I know what a heavy lift it is,
right?
Like personally,
Yeah.
And my wife too is one of those people who has made that decision to break those cycles for her family, and it's a heavy lift and it's a hard road. And one of the things that to break that cycle of generational trauma, there's another process that's oftentimes involved, and that is to let go of an old worldview and embrace a new worldview. And so if breaking generational trauma is like the heaviest lift we can do, the scariest thing we can do is let go of a worldview and embrace a new one. And the reason I say that, and I mean that it really is the scariest thing, is, like our worldview is like a set of glasses that we put on that show us what is safe, what is dangerous. Is this safe? What's good? What's bad? What's right? What's wrong? We look through our worldview that our culture and our family has given us to determine all of those things. And so whenever we have to take off a worldview, right, there's a period where we don't know what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's up, what's down. And that can be really scary. It takes immense courage to let go of a worldview and embrace a new one. The example that I use of this all the time is like the hermit crab, right? The hermit crab, classically outgrows its shell. And at some point, if it stays in that shell, it's going to choke it out. It's going to limit its growth. And it finds another shell, and it's like, all right, I'm ready to make the jump. But when it leaves the old shell, there's always a period between the old shell and the new shell, no shell, soft and vulnerable, right? Vulnerable to predation. Like something bad could happen because you don't have the safety of that shell. And those two often come hand in hand, and it takes strength and it takes courage to make the decision to do that process in your life. And that's one of the things I guess I want to say to people who identify as men or have more masculine energy listening to this is like, there's room in this process for your strength and your courage.
Yes.
And like the old way of thinking of all of this is like, I always joke that like I feel like as American men we have like two options of who we get to be. You can either be Mr. Rogers or you can be Rambo. You could be Ned Flanders, or you can be Jason Statham. Like or some crap like that. And I think the masculinity that is evolving and coming into presence right now in this culture is a masculinity that can be strong and can be courageous, can be adventurous and bold, can be a challenger, but is also compassionate and self-aware and sensitive and generous and caring. Those two things are not diametrically opposed, right? Those two things can come together like a yin yang, We can have both halves of those things. And I hope that in my journey, I think my goal has been to embody both at the same time. And to be bold and adventurous and strong and daring, but to be present with my kids, to be a compassionate presence for my patients, and to be a deeply caring and sensitive person, but also, hopefully, in some ways, a badass when I need to be. I hope.
Well,
that's what I'm working towards here. I'm trying my best.
I mean, people who understand going into this world know that you're a badass already because you had like some pretty heavy traumas. And, one of the ways I think that my approach is masculine. I'm a man, but I put values around. So I have this hero's journey notion, and I have the values around the way that I operate in the world now, which is really informed by my experience in business, but they're curiosity, courage, and action. And it's sort of like, okay, what can I be? Like, I need to be curious about my internal state and what's happening because things are continuously arising. I also need to be curious about what is out there and how I can heal and be better. And then also knowing that some of this stuff takes courage. And it also takes, in my view, daily action. And so I think that's a more masculine approach to frame it. It's not just, sitting and talking about your feelings is great. I'm all for it. But if we can put that in a context that I think more people can be healed if they can frame it in a way that feels aligned with who they think of themselves as.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is on the action part, I want to get your take on the scans because the other part of it, in seeing a scan of my brain and knowing that, I just sort of came up with, I'm going to try to do things every day that's helpful for my brain.
Yeah.
And they all don't have to be this monumental thing, right? I'm going to take some supplements that are right. I'm going to walk to the park and sit 10 minutes without my phone. I'm going to whatever it is to do, but to look at it like, okay, I have an injury. And I want to move that injury into a place of healing. And so how do I do it? So what is your view on scanning people's brain as part of this whole process? What I did at your clinic is QEEG, which I think is maybe the most affordable. And give me sort of some senses of what that is like and maybe why QEEG, if you believe it's a good first one, makes sense.
Yeah, so a little bit of background that's necessary to lead up to the answer to that question. We have a model that has taught us that there is mental health and there is physical health, right? And either the problem is in your mind or it's in your body, but those two things are totally separate, right? Which I think everybody experientially knows and intuitively knows is just straight bullshit. Right? Like every patient I have this talk with is like, yeah, I know. Like I've wanted to have care that it's like acknowledges that these things are connected, and there's reasons, in our history. You can go all the way back to Descartes and Cartesian dualism. I think, therefore I am. And all of this of why we've had this split, especially in the West, between mind and body. And even though it's just a super outdated model, like, you go to your counselor and then you go to your PCP and your PCP gives you medicine and your counselor talks about your feelings and the two don't even communicate or integrate their care. So when we're looking at somebody's, brain health, right, there's a lot of different angles that we can look at it from. So one angle is to look at it from a more psychological level, and this is what counselors are really good at, and psychologists. And what is the psychology? What is the mind piece of the equation? So that's one way that we can look at the health and functioning of your brain. What you're talking about, QEEG, for people who don't know, that is an electrical analysis. It's an electrical picture of your brain and its functioning. And another way that we can look at it is, like, one test that I'll run a lot is I'll do genetic testing to see what genes do you have that determine the way that neurotransmitters are produced in your brain. And neurotransmitters are the signaling molecules, things like serotonin and dopamine, epinephrine and norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate. Like, different people have different genes, and they produce and transport and receive these signals in different ways. And another way that we can look at your brain is chemically and actually test, well, what are those chemicals and how are they working, and what is your nutritional status? Because your brain runs on fuel and nutrients just like the rest of your body, right? So we can look at your brain's health from a lot of different angles. And so if we're looking at it from a mental or psychological standpoint, an electrical standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, maybe there's imaging, and we see all of those pictures pointing to the same pattern or the same deficit or excess from all those different angles, it's like, there's the root cause, right? So QEEG is really important because it gives us a more functional picture of your brain. The way that I talk about this, what we're talking about, beginning to talk about here, is what we call integrative mental health. So the example that I use to try to explain all this complexity to my patients is, think of yourself like a car, okay? And think about your brain as the engine to the car, let's say. And so what does the car need to do? Like, what does the car need to get from point A to point B? Well, at the most basic level, it needs fuel, right? Nutrition is a big piece of how your brain works, and nutrition has huge impacts on the functioning of your brain. Your brain needs fuel. You were talking about ketones and, your ketone drink and creatine, like, and you notice that, like, this actually makes me feel much brighter. It makes me feel more focused and not jittery like caffeine when I use these compounds compared to that. Like, the fuel you put into your car matters. Like, if you're putting diesel in a Honda Civic, you're going to have some problems, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so at that level, we've got that. Now, when it comes to actually, let's take that a little bit further. But then we also have more specific nutrients. Just like the car needs lubrication, it needs coolant, it needs transmission fluid, and like all of these things, like there are some very specific needs that the brain has, like omega-3s and phospholipids and B vitamins and micronutrients like magnesium. Just like if your car doesn't have the lubricants it needs or the coolant it needs, like, it's not going to run well, right? So now we're kind of talking on a more physical or mechanical level. Now, let's talk more on an operational level. So with QEEG and neurofeedback and neurostimulation, think about that like it's this transmission that's coupled to the motor of your brain. Your brain operates at different frequencies: delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta, gamma. So think of the transmission like a 6-speed transmission, right? If you're trying to drive 65 miles per hour down the highway in first gear, right? Probably it's not going to happen. If it does, it's not going to be the right gear for the job, and your motor is going to be screaming. If you're in the Walmart parking lot driving 10 miles per hour and you're in 6th gear, not going to be good for your engine. You're probably going to stall out. So just like that, like when you are sleeping at night, you need to be down in delta and theta. You need to be down in first gear, second gear. When you are in the middle of the day and you are focused and you are productive and you are performing, you need to be up like in 6th gear, cruising at highway speeds. It's not that any gear is good or bad or right or wrong. It's about, is your brain in the right gear for the conditions, and is it able to change gears at the right time? That's what's so important. So neurostim and neurofeedback is really working with the frequencies of your brain and your brain's adaptability to be in the correct state for the demands. Biofeedback, which is part of what I do, it's like the gas and the brake. you're probably familiar with sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. For people that aren't, sympathetic is like the fight and flight response. That's the gas pedal that makes you go, go, go. Brake pedal is parasympathetic. That is rest, digest, heal, reproduce. So you need to be able to use your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system just like we use the gas pedal and brake pedal in the car. Again, it's not that one or the other is bad. Like for a lot of people, sympathetic equals fight or flight equals stress, stress equals bad. If we did not have a sympathetic nervous system, if we did not have a stress response, we would have been eaten by the saber-toothed tigers and we would not be here.
Yeah, or we'd just walk in front of a car in the street and get you killed in the present day.
Stress is not bad, right? Stress is not the problem. It's the inability to get off the gas pedal. So the example I like to use with people for this is, imagine you're driving down I-25 in front of Mile High Stadium, rush hour traffic. What would happen if you press the gas pedal down, it gets stuck down, and you won't come back up?
Yeah.
You're going to crash into something, right?
It's going to be a nightmare.
Similarly, if you were to tap on your brakes lock up, you squeal to a halt in the middle of rush hour traffic, what's going to happen? Someone's going to crash into you, right? Neither is good or bad. The ability to perceive the conditions around you correctly and have the appropriate response and react in a way, oh, I need to merge, a little bit more gas. Oh, the person in front of me is stopping, I need to slow down a little bit. Oh, now I need to get up there, here comes my exit, a little more gas. Oh, I got to slow down before the turn, right? Is your nervous system adaptable and variable? We can measure this in terms of heart rate variability, which a lot of people know about now. That's why we use heart rate variability. It's the switching between the gas and the brake. But then there's another piece of the puzzle here, and that is the car needs a driver, right? And your mind is the driver of the car, right? And so this is why counseling and talk therapy and the psychological side of things is important. I said you need to be able to perceive the world around you correctly and have an appropriate response. And your response needs to be adaptive in nature and not maladaptive, right? So if, say, for instance, 2 days after getting your driver's license when you were 16, you had a run-in with a semi-truck and you nearly died, and the rest of your life, every single time you drive by a semi, you have a panic attack and your vision drops out and you get lightheaded and you have to pull over. Well, that's not serving you well. That's actually making you more in danger than it is, keeping you safe. So we also have to work with the driver behind the wheel to help you to be able to perceive the world correctly and react to it in a way that actually gets you from point A to point B, right? And doesn't put you in danger.
Yeah.
So the problem, if I could emphasize one point when it comes to like the clinical side of things, is what people are used to. They go to their counselor who, tries to fix the driver. And then they go to their PCP who tries to fix the fact that they don't have enough transmission fluid. And then they watch, listen to some podcast or something, and they're like, I'm going to do a ketogenic diet and I'm just going to change the fuel. You're right. Or, I'm going to do meditation and I'm only going to learn how to use the gas pedal and brakes, or breath work or something. None of those things are bad things. The thing is that we need to have all of those systems operational to successfully and safely get from point A to point B. So people jump from this therapy to that therapy to the other therapy, and one therapist works here and their doctor works there, and nobody communicates and nobody coordinates. So what we're trying to create at NeuroGrove is a team of integrated providers who address all of those levels at the same time, so we can make the whole system work. And one piece of it was getting a picture of the electrical activity of the brain, so we can make sure that the transmission's working correctly, right? And that's one essential piece of a larger picture of what it means to provide integrative mental health care.
And what a contrast to the fact that the majority of people's experience in the mental health world is getting an SSRI prescribed by their primary care doctor who talks with them for 10 minutes about it.
Yep.
And they have no idea what the function. I mean, most primary care doctors have never looked at the QEEG scan, and they of course know stuff about the function of the body. But I think anybody can see that like this approach makes more sense than the kind of approach that we have, stumbled into as a healthcare system.
Right. I have a friend who is a Harvard-trained MD, and he runs a family medicine residency. And I was talking to him about all this one day, and he's like, you want me to be completely honest with you? And I mean, this is a high caliber doctor and a very good doctor. He's like, every single time I see somebody with a mental health condition on my schedule, I feel panic because he's like, I really received no training in mental health. And all I have to do is I have screening tools and I have algorithms. And I know that they need more than that. But the primary care providers in this country are the de facto number one, like mainline mental health provider. That's who people go to. And really, most medical doctors have very, very little training in mental health. And they'll be the first ones to tell you about it if you have an honest conversation with them. But they're still on the front lines trying to fight this mental health epidemic, but they're not equipped and they're not tooled for the jobs. And they don't have the time. I mean, like you said, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, like, come on.
Yeah.
And their hands are tied because it's like, well, insurance says you have to take Prozac first. And then if you fail Prozac, then we can consider this medication. If you fail that medication, we can consider this medication. And then if you fail 3 medications, then it's treatment-resistant depression, and now we can explore something like ketamine-assisted therapy. And so it's the system is deeply, deeply broken. And now I'm a naturopathic doctor, but we also have medical doctors on staff. We have counselors, LPCs, LCSWs, neurofeedback, biofeedback. Every single profession has a part to play in creating this system of health. And I'm not anti any profession. Like, we all have our strengths and weaknesses as providers.
Yeah.
But man, we need to work together because health is bigger than the system we've created, which just always reduces it down to parts. It's not parts, it's a system.
Right. Wow. Well, what an awesome conversation. I feel so blessed. I mean, at least one person is going to get a lot of value out of this. I know that, man. I really appreciate your time. And as we're kind of leaving, if you had one wish for people to hear, to walk away from, for the world, for the system, for anything, like, what would you kind of want to leave this on?
Wow. Yeah. End with an easy question.
Yeah. Just, take 4 seconds and contemplate that.
I want to challenge anybody listening to this to not think of this in terms of cliches and tropes and Instagram pictures, but to really hear these words, knowing that I'm saying them to you. And the words are, you matter simply because you exist. And you deserve healing and you deserve wholeness. You're worthy of it, not because of anything you've done, because you are you. And I encourage you to make the courageous decision to put yourself at the center of your life and access the care that you need to be your healthiest, most balanced, and best self. And you giving that gift to yourself will in turn give all the people in your life the gift of you.
Wow, couldn't have ended better. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Excited for November 22nd.
Yeah.
You're going to give away a free scan and consult. So there's only 150 tickets. So, you got a 1 in 150 chance of winning $1,000 with Dr. Ryan and his team, which I can tell is of value from my personal experience and my family's experience. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we'll do this again.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much for joining the Neuro's Journey podcast. If this episode landed, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The real medicine is in the connection, and this community only grows when we reach for each other.
Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. And if you have a minute, leaving a rating really helps more people find this work. And keep showing up for your own journey. Every small act of courage matters. For you, for the people around you, and for all of us. I am so grateful to be walking this path with you.